Picture boarding your Newark to Orlando flight, craving a peaceful journey through cloud-streaked skies and savoring your morning coffee, only to have the cabin explode with hostility when your seatmate, Karen, plunks into the aisle seat and blurts she feels unsafe next to you, because of your skin. A hush falls before tension surges like lightning as prejudice collides with poise. How will he respond? Comment on the video, where are people watching, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. The story begins with the narrator, a black man, creating an open dialogue with the audience. He invites comments from viewers, encouraging them to share their personal experiences with racism. The invitation serves as a segue to a larger narrative, one that reflects on the subtle ways racism manifests in everyday situations. This sets the tone for the reflection to come. One where the narrator will share an encounter with a neighborly, yet deeply prejudiced, woman who disrupts an otherwise normal flight. The narrator, a seasoned professional who's likely faced prejudice before, embarks on a routine flight from Newark to Orlando. As he boards, he braces himself for the typical discomfort that accompanies a crowded flight but hopes for a smooth journey. Settling into his seat, he finds himself wedged in the cramped space of the airplane. A window seat, while offering a view of the sky, also brings the confinement that all passengers must face, especially on a flight that promises to be long enough for unwanted encounters. Soon after, his seatmate arrives, Karen. She is a woman who, by her outward appearance, embodies entitlement and an unspoken sense of superiority. As she approaches, the narrator gets a quick read of her demeanor, as though her presence itself demands respect or, at the very least, space. The narrator remains calm and composed, preparing for the usual interactions. Little does he know that this flight will be anything but ordinary. As soon as Karen settles in next to him, the encounter begins. Karen doesn't waste time. She turns to the narrator and, with a sense of exaggerated discomfort, makes a blunt statement: she doesn't feel safe sitting next to a black man. The words hang in the air, dripping with prejudice, and the narrator's instincts kick in. His calm exterior hides the familiar sting of discrimination, something he's no stranger to. The discomfort she feels isn't his problem, nor is it rooted in any actual danger. Instead, it stems from the deep-seated bias that Karen, whether she's fully conscious of it or not, has internalized. Her words are unfiltered, but they don't shake the narrator's poise. He's been in situations like this before and learned long ago how to remain composed, even in the face of such ignorance. The flight attendant moves through the aisle as the tension builds. The narrator remains in his seat, refusing to let Karen's prejudice unravel his peace. Her discomfort with his presence is almost palpable, but the narrator does nothing to fuel the exchange. This is not a moment to escalate. Instead, he chooses to observe, to let her feel the weight of her own assumptions. Karen, realizing the situation isn't shifting as she'd hoped, makes the classic move of trying to escalate it further. Her eyes flicker around the cabin as she searches for a way to shift the balance of power. At this point, the flight is already descending into something much more complicated than the narrator had expected. Little does Karen know, the flight will soon become the setting for her own self-realization, albeit a humbling one. The narrator doesn't immediately respond, keeping his calm. He knows this interaction has just begun and wonders how far Karen will push things before she realizes her own discomfort and assumptions are the root of the problem. What starts as a mild confrontation quickly becomes a test of patience, resilience, and perhaps even an opportunity for Karen to face her own deeply held prejudices, one she may not even recognize until it's too late. As the flight progresses, the tension between the narrator and Karen continues to simmer. Karen, clearly feeling uneasy about the situation, tries to find a way to validate her discomfort. She glances at the flight attendants as if hoping they will somehow intervene on her behalf. However, the attendants remain focused on their duties, making no move to assist her in confronting the narrator. Karen, realizing that her initial outburst hasn't produced the expected reaction, starts to escalate. Her discomfort turns into irritation, and she begins to fidget in her seat. Her body language becomes more defensive, arms crossed, a furrowed brow. At one point, she shifts in her seat, subtly distancing herself from the narrator as if trying to physically create more space between them, despite the limited space on the flight. Unable to tolerate the discomfort she perceives, Karen turns towards the narrator. "I'm just saying, you never know what could happen," she says, her voice higher now, as if to ensure she's heard. "I'm just being cautious. You never know who you're sitting next to these days." Her words are laced with the same underlying judgment she's expressed earlier, but now they are tinged with an almost fearful tone, as if she's trying to justify her actions. The narrator feels the weight of her assumptions but remains composed, not willing to allow the situation to escalate further. He's been in moments like this before, where people's biases are laid bare, and he knows it's not his job to make others comfortable with their own prejudice. Karen, feeling the growing discomfort in the air, turns to the flight attendants as if waiting for them to side with her. However, the attendants continue with their duties, offering no support. It seems the staff is well versed in handling awkward passengers, knowing when to step in and when to leave things alone. After a long silence, Karen takes matters into her own hands again. She signals for the flight attendant to come over, her eyes wide with the implication that something needs to be done. "I don't feel safe here," she says to the attendant, her voice now shaky but insistent. "I'm really uncomfortable. Can you do something about this?" The flight attendant, a woman who's seen countless disturbances during her time in the air, leans in with a calm smile. "Ma'am, I understand your concerns, but this is a public flight, and we can't force someone to leave based on personal discomfort." She adds, "Is there a specific issue you'd like us to address?" Karen huffs, clearly frustrated that she's not getting the response she wanted. But her frustration is palpable, she can't let it go. "I don't think it's right. He's a stranger. I don't feel safe next to him," she mutters under her breath, though loud enough for the narrator to hear. This is when the realization sets in, Karen's discomfort isn't just about proximity or mere annoyance. It's about her deep-seated biases that have found a voice. The flight attendant, sensing the situation is becoming uncomfortable for everyone, walks away but leaves behind the unsettling tension that lingers in the air. The rest of the flight continues, but the narrator feels the emotional toll of Karen's judgments. Though Karen's direct actions are frustrating, the narrator holds his ground. His calm demeanor speaks volumes, contrasting with Karen's escalating agitation. While Karen remains focused on her irrational fears, the narrator doesn't let her comments affect him. Instead, he reflects quietly, understanding that her discomfort isn't personal, it's the product of a system of biases that have been ingrained for years. As the flight moves toward its destination, Karen's behavior grows more erratic, and the tension between them is palpable. The narrator knows that it's only a matter of time before she pushes things even further, but he remains steadfast, unbothered by her actions. He knows the power lies in his response, and at this moment, he chooses not to respond in kind. Instead, he decides to let Karen's actions speak for themselves. The flight, once a simple journey to Orlando, now feels like a metaphor for a larger issue at play, a battle for dignity and respect in the face of unwarranted prejudice. The tension on the flight is palpable. As the hours drag on, Karen becomes more visibly uncomfortable, shifting in her seat every few minutes. She can't seem to focus on anything other than the man sitting next to her. The narrative in her head is growing louder, as she wrestles with the discomfort of her prejudice. The fact that the narrator is calmly reading a book, minding his own business, only irritates her more. She expects him to respond, to apologize for the situation, to make her feel better about her assumptions, but that doesn't happen. Unable to contain her agitation any longer, Karen turns her attention back to the narrator. "I don't know how you can just sit there," she says, her voice slightly shaking. "It's not safe. You never know who you're sitting next to." The words are harsh, loaded with judgment, but the narrator simply looks up, not surprised by her words but disappointed. He's dealt with this before, people who think their discomfort is a valid reason for someone else to change. But he's not about to let her control the situation. He calmly places his book on the seat next to him and looks her in the eye. "If you're feeling uncomfortable, you could always switch seats," he suggests, his tone even and measured. But I'm not the problem here. Karen's face turns a shade of red, both from anger and the realization that her biased assumptions are now being called out. She opens her mouth to say something, but before she can, she's interrupted by the flight attendant's arrival. Karen immediately takes advantage of the situation, flagging down the attendant. "Excuse me," she says, her voice high-pitched, "this man is making me feel unsafe. I don't think he should be sitting next to me." The flight attendant, a woman who has handled more than a few difficult passengers in her time, listens to Karen's complaints with a professional demeanor. "Ma'am, I understand your concerns, but we are at cruising altitude, and there are no other seats available. Is there something specific about your interaction with this passenger that you need assistance with?" Karen's gaze shifts to the flight attendant, a slight pause before she responds. "I just don't think it's right that I'm expected to sit next to someone I don't feel safe with. I don't know him, he could be dangerous. I feel like I'm being harassed." The narrator, still maintaining his composure, speaks up. "I haven't said a word to her, and I'm not sure what exactly makes her uncomfortable. I'm just sitting here quietly." The flight attendant turns to the narrator and then back to Karen. She's seen this kind of drama before, but there's something different about Karen's behavior, something more deeply ingrained. The flight attendant offers a neutral smile and says, "Ma'am, you are more than welcome to move to another seat if that makes you feel safer. But please remember, this is a public space, and everyone has a right to be here." Karen's face tightens, but she doesn't move. Instead, she crosses her arms, her posture now rigid and defiant. It's clear she's not about to let the situation drop. The words Karen had said earlier are still echoing in the air. "It's just that I don't feel safe next to him," she mutters again, this time for the whole row to hear. As the minutes pass, the discomfort in the cabin grows. Karen's behavior has begun to attract attention. A few passengers glance over, unsure of what's going on, but the flight attendants handle it with grace, moving on with their duties. But Karen, emboldened by the flight attendant's previous interaction, doubles down. "I think I need to call 911, Karen declares suddenly, her voice now shrill, as she grabs her phone from the seat pocket. "I'm not staying next to someone who makes me feel like this. He's probably dangerous, and I'm not taking chances." The tension in the cabin ratchets up as Karen makes the call. The passengers begin to whisper among themselves, some looking toward the narrator, while others look at Karen, who now seems both determined and out of place in her escalating behavior. The narrator, now aware of Karen's intentions, knows this will likely lead to unnecessary conflict. He remains calm, resolutely staring out the window, as Karen continues her one-sided conversation with the 911 dispatcher. His grip on his book tightens, but he doesn't react. He won't give Karen the satisfaction of a fight. Instead, he waits, allowing her actions to reveal her true nature. As the call continues, Karen's accusations grow more irrational. She says, "Yes, he's harassing me. He's sitting too close, and I don't know who he is. Please send someone quickly." The narrator's patience is wearing thin, but he knows he must stay composed. He has the time and the calm to let Karen dig her own hole, exposing her irrational fears and prejudice for everyone to see. This part of the story highlights the escalating conflict between Karen and the narrator as the tension builds. The exchange between them becomes a lesson in patience for the narrator, who chooses to remain calm and let Karen's behavior speak for itself. As Karen continues her call to 911, the flight cabin becomes unnervingly quiet. The buzz of murmuring passengers fills the air, with a few casting curious glances in the direction of Karen and the narrator. Some are sympathetic toward the man, others unsure of what's happening, but the general sense of discomfort is undeniable. The situation has escalated beyond a simple disagreement, and now, with the involvement of law enforcement, the stakes are higher. Karen's voice grows increasingly frantic as she describes the situation to the 911 dispatcher. "I don't know, I just don't feel safe sitting next to him. He's a stranger. He could be dangerous. I think he's probably trying to steal from me or something. I don't know. But please, I need someone to come and help. The narrator remains calm, his hands steady as he rests them on the armrests of his seat. He doesn't take his eyes off the view outside the window. His mind races through the options, calculating what he should do. Should he confront her again? Should he defend himself against these outrageous claims? His training as a police officer helps him maintain composure. There's nothing to be gained from escalating this further. Karen is digging her own grave with every word, and he knows it. The flight attendants exchange looks, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but they maintain professionalism. They're not in a position to intervene in any meaningful way unless they're called upon, and at this moment, their hands are tied. The tension in the cabin is palpable, but the attendants keep moving through their duties, avoiding direct confrontation while keeping an eye on the unfolding drama. "Ma'am, we're not equipped to handle this here," one of the flight attendants says, stepping toward Karen. "If you feel unsafe, we'll gladly find you another seat, but it's important to remain calm." Karen's response is sharp, her tone filled with indignation. "No. I want him removed. He's a threat to my safety, and you're not doing anything about it. Why are you letting this happen?" At this point, the flight attendants begin to lose patience. The man seated beside Karen, sensing the tension, moves to the back of the plane, avoiding further conflict. The situation is beginning to spiral, and Karen, still holding onto the phone, doesn't seem to notice the silent judgment of the other passengers. They can all hear her escalating accusations, and it's clear to most that she is the one making a scene. Just as Karen finishes her rant, the 911 dispatcher on the other end responds. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but we've reviewed your request. There is no immediate threat here, and it sounds like a misunderstanding. There is no need to involve the police at this moment." Karen slams the phone down in frustration, her face flushed with embarrassment. But instead of backing down, she crosses her arms and leans back in her seat, clearly unwilling to let it go. "You people just don't understand," she mutters under her breath, her words dripping with contempt. "I'm just trying to protect myself." The narrator sighs deeply, knowing this situation won't resolve itself without intervention. He looks at the flight attendant and says, "I understand your role, but I think this situation has gone too far. She's been making baseless accusations for the last 15 minutes, and now it's involving the entire flight." The attendant nods, glancing over to the cockpit as the captain's voice comes through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be descending shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for arrival." With those words, the tension in the cabin increases. Karen, realizing her moment of attention is slipping away, looks to the front of the plane, making one last attempt to salvage her control of the situation. She opens her mouth to say something more, but at that exact moment, the narrator stands up, walks to the back of the plane, and makes his way toward the restroom. As the plane begins its descent, the captain's announcement still fresh in the passengers' minds, Karen realizes that her behavior has attracted more attention than she ever expected. She can feel the eyes of others on her, and despite the mounting discomfort, she can't bring herself to stop her tirade. It's as if she's compelled to keep pushing, needing to justify her actions in the face of mounting opposition. She wants to win, to prove that she was right all along. But the truth is clear to everyone else, she has been wrong. The flight continues its descent as Karen stews in her own frustration. The narrator, having risen from his seat earlier, now stands in the aisle, talking quietly with the flight attendants and calmly explaining his side of the story. His voice is even, his demeanor controlled. He knows this is no longer a simple misunderstanding. He has been falsely accused, his integrity challenged in front of the entire cabin. As the plane touches down and taxis toward the gate, the tension in the cabin doesn't dissipate. Instead, it builds, and Karen, feeling cornered, turns to the only option she feels she has left. She calls 911 again. This time, however, the dispatcher's tone is different. "Ma'am, as I said earlier, there is no emergency here. You're causing a disturbance on the flight, and we've informed the airline that no action is necessary. The next few minutes are filled with tension as the plane reaches the gate, and the passengers begin to stand and gather their belongings. As they file out, Karen attempts to follow the same, but she is stopped by a flight attendant. "Please wait here," she says, her voice firm but professional. "We need to speak with you." Karen's face tightens. She doesn't respond to the flight attendant's request and instead crosses her arms tightly, glaring at the others around her. She's angry, but now the weight of the situation is settling in. The moment the plane docks, the local authorities arrive. 2 officers approach, and Karen's panic escalates. One officer, Sergeant Ramirez, asks Karen what happened. The other officer, Officer Johnson, turns to the narrator and gives him a nod of recognition, clearly more familiar with the man than Karen could ever have imagined. With calm but deliberate words, the officers begin to piece together the events that led to this moment. Sergeant Ramirez listens to Karen's version of events, but the evidence is undeniable. The story doesn't match up. Karen's claims, her false accusations, have no merit. The officers recognize this, and with that realization, they turn to confront Karen. It isn't long before the officers confirm that Karen has fabricated the story and misled the authorities. They handcuff her and escort her off the plane, her head hung low in shame. As she's taken away, a sense of justice settles over the passengers, though some still cast sympathetic glances at her. The narrator watches with quiet satisfaction. His composure has carried him through this, and now the truth has prevailed. The captain makes another announcement, offering a brief apology for the delay, and the passengers slowly exit the plane. The tension has lifted, and though the encounter with Karen was unpleasant, it will ultimately lead to a positive outcome for the narrator. As Karen is escorted off the plane by the officers, the cabin begins to settle into a quiet calm. The murmurs of disbelief from the other passengers slowly fade as they prepare to disembark. However, the situation is far from over. The encounter between Karen and the narrator, though resolved on the surface, is now set to unfold in a more serious way, legally. The emotional toll of the confrontation lingers as the authorities prepare to press charges for the false report, and the narrator knows this is only the beginning. Once the plane has reached the gate and the remaining passengers have deplaned, the narrator is met by Officer Ramirez, who nods at him in recognition. The officers make their way toward the terminal security office, where Karen is being held temporarily until the situation is fully processed. The tension is still palpable in the air, but there is also a sense of relief. The overwhelming frustration Karen caused during the flight was now at an end. The officers bring the narrator into the security room, where a police report is being filed. They ask for his statement, taking notes as he recounts the events leading up to the confrontation. The officer who had initially recognized the narrator as a familiar face, Officer Johnson, takes the lead in questioning him. "So, this wasn't the first time she made accusations like this, right?" The narrator shakes his head. "No. I've had encounters with people like her before, people who make assumptions based on race and stereotypes. She went as far as calling the authorities and accusing me of things that weren't true." As the interview continues, the officers begin to understand the full extent of Karen's actions, realizing that her behavior was not just irrational, but malicious. The false police report she filed was an attempt to have the narrator removed and taken into custody for a crime he didn't commit. The officers discuss the legal ramifications of Karen's actions, particularly how her accusations have caused significant disruption and distress. "I've been calm about it," the narrator says, his voice steady but with a hint of exhaustion. "But the fact that she went as far as calling 911 and fabricating a story says a lot about her. This wasn't just a misunderstanding." "I agree," Officer Ramirez says, looking over the notes on his clipboard. "We'll make sure this gets processed and handled properly. But this goes beyond her just making a false claim. It's also harassment." As the conversation wraps up, the officers explain that Karen will be charged with filing a false report, creating a public disturbance, and attempting to mislead the authorities. There are also potential charges related to harassment and the creation of a hostile environment based on racial profiling. The legal implications of this moment aren't lost on the narrator. Karen's actions will have long-term consequences, and he'll be a key part of the legal process going forward. Walking out of the terminal, the narrator takes a deep breath, the weight of the situation still weighing heavily on him. He's grateful the immediate tension is over, but he knows that Karen's actions need to be addressed to prevent future occurrences. His actions today were measured, but his resolve is stronger than ever. This situation is about more than just the confrontation, it's about holding people accountable for their words and actions. In the weeks that follow, the story of the flight confrontation spreads, becoming a topic of conversation for both local and national news. The incident garners attention on social media, with many supporting the narrator for staying calm and handling the situation with dignity. People begin to recognize the narrator as a symbol of resilience against prejudice, and his reputation begins to grow. Meanwhile, Karen's reputation, however, begins to crumble. The charges against her are significant. Her false police report is a clear violation of the law, and the media outlets, which initially portrayed her as the victim, start to paint her in a less sympathetic light. The community, once unsure of the full story, now stands with the narrator, offering support and condemning her actions. As the legal proceedings unfold, Karen's lawyers attempt to downplay the severity of her actions. They claim it was an unfortunate misunderstanding and that Karen never intended for things to escalate. However, the evidence, her own words recorded on 911 tapes, the testimony from the flight attendants, and the statements from passengers, speaks for itself. The trial is a drawn-out affair, with Karen attempting to save face, but the facts remain clear. One evening, the narrator receives an official notification from the court system: Karen has been found guilty of filing a false police report and causing a public disturbance. She's sentenced to a fine, community service, and mandated anti-bias training. But for the narrator, the legal victory is bittersweet. Justice has been served, but the emotional toll of the situation lingers. At the same time, the flight attendants and passengers who witnessed the incident reach out to the narrator, offering words of support and admiration. Several passengers even send him messages, thanking him for staying calm and standing firm in the face of injustice. The community begins to rally around him, recognizing the dignity with which he handled the confrontation. Though Karen's actions may have temporarily disrupted the peace of the flight, the aftermath of the situation has had a lasting impact on both her and the narrator. As for the narrator, he continues to live his life, not allowing the incident to define him. He understands that moments like these are a reflection of the deeper issues within society, but they are also moments where change can occur. The journey is far from over, but the victory feels sweet. For the narrator, it's not just about winning the case, it's about making sure that the voice of reason and fairness prevails in a world where bias and prejudice often hold sway. He knows that change takes time, but today, he made a small but significant difference. The aftermath of Karen's false accusations has left a lasting impact, but for the narrator, things have slowly begun to settle into a sense of normalcy. The legal proceedings are over, Karen's reputation tarnished, and the court-ordered consequences for her actions are in place. The community around the narrator has come to respect him even more for his calm demeanor and his unwavering commitment to justice, even in the face of adversity. Though justice has been served, the narrator knows that the damage to his emotional well-being was not as easily fixed. It's not just about the legal victory, this was a battle that tapped into deeper, more personal issues of racial bias and prejudice. Every day, he faces the invisible weight of assumptions made about him because of his skin color. But today, he's no longer just a victim of such assumptions, he's a figure who stood up, remained calm, and made a difference. He's proud of how he handled the situation. The confrontation with Karen and her false accusations forced him to deal with things he didn't always want to address, but it also allowed him to become more aware of the everyday battles others like him face. The support from the community, his colleagues, and even strangers who reached out after the incident has given him a sense of peace he didn't expect. For the first time in a long while, he feels like he is part of something bigger, a movement toward fairness and understanding. As the weeks pass, the media attention on the case dies down, but the support from his neighbors and community continues. He now receives more invitations to speak about his experience, to use his voice to encourage change. While he doesn't seek the limelight, he recognizes the responsibility he has. This is his chance to share his story and, in doing so, hopefully inspire others to take a stand against bias and prejudice when they see it. The narrative around the case has shifted. No longer is Karen the victim of a misunderstood situation, the truth has come to light, and she is now the one who has to live with the consequences of her actions. It's been a tough journey for her, but the reality is, her actions were damaging not only to the narrator but to the community as a whole. Her position as a self-appointed authority in the neighborhood has been stripped from her, and she now faces the consequences of her discriminatory actions. For the narrator, the journey hasn't been just about the confrontation, it's been about how he's emerged from it. The fight for justice is ongoing, but he feels like he has taken a significant step in the right direction. As he watches the community heal, he knows that despite the ugliness of the situation, there is always room for growth, understanding, and change. As he walks around his neighborhood, he notices the small shifts in people's attitudes. There's a newfound respect, not just for him but for others as well. People are more aware now, more sensitive to the impact of their words and actions. It's a slow change, but it's progress. The narrator knows it's not a perfect world, but he's hopeful that with each step, things can get better. The months following the trial have brought a sense of peace to the narrator, but the ripples of the incident continue to affect him. The support he received from his community has helped him heal, but he's also more aware of the quiet battles that so many people face daily. He has always known that racism is deeply embedded in society, but the confrontation with Karen made it personal. It pushed him into a corner where he had no choice but to stand up, not just for himself but for those who are often marginalized. He now feels a deep sense of responsibility to use his platform, his experience, to speak out against racism and injustice whenever he can. He started speaking at local community events and schools, sharing his story, educating others on how to recognize and confront prejudice when they see it. The narrative of his experience has evolved. No longer is it just about his confrontation with Karen, it's about how society can learn to recognize and dismantle bias. His friends, family, and colleagues continue to express their admiration for how he handled the situation. They're proud of how he stayed calm under pressure, how he chose not to retaliate against Karen's aggressive behavior, and how he used his voice to speak truthfully about what happened. The sense of justice that followed his actions has inspired others to speak up as well. The neighborhood that had once been divided by Karen's self-appointed authority now feels more unified, more aware of the need for inclusivity. But not all of the effects are positive. The incident has brought about a heightened sensitivity to racial issues in the neighborhood, which is both a blessing and a curse. While many have become more understanding, there are still those who resist the change. Some of Karen's supporters continue to harbor the same prejudices and biases, unwilling to see past their own narrow worldview. But the narrator doesn't let this discourage him. He's seen firsthand how awareness can spark change, and he's determined to continue pushing for a better, more inclusive future. As he walks through his neighborhood, he reflects on how far things have come. He's more confident now, more willing to engage in uncomfortable conversations if it means bringing about change. He knows that the journey isn't over, but he also knows that he's making a difference, one step at a time. It's a journey that will continue, not just for him, but for everyone who believes in equality and justice. The dust has settled, and the trial is now behind him, but the lessons from the encounter with Karen continue to resonate. The narrator's life has returned to a sense of normalcy, but his perspective has shifted. The experience has not only taught him the importance of standing up for what is right but also the value of remaining composed in the face of adversity. His actions during that tense flight, remaining calm, documenting the situation, and allowing Karen's behavior to speak for itself, served as a reminder that sometimes the best way to handle prejudice is to take a step back, assess the situation, and allow the truth to reveal itself. Looking back, the narrator is proud of how he navigated the storm. His approach was not one of confrontation or anger, but of quiet confidence and a commitment to justice. The legal victory over Karen was not just about proving her wrong, but about reinforcing the idea that people should be held accountable for their words and actions. Racism and discrimination cannot be allowed to fester unchecked, and every individual has a responsibility to challenge it when it arises. He feels that his story, though personal, has become a symbol for something greater. It's a story of resilience, of using one's voice to bring about change. It's a reminder that justice isn't always instantaneous, but with patience, integrity, and the support of a community, change is possible. And most importantly, it's a reminder that standing up against injustice can make a real difference.